Welcome to Feature Creep, the Star Citizen show with a tongue-in-cheek name for a problem often associated with the game's development. For anybody new, instead of reiterating the issue, this series will in turn tend to explore it, often imagining, building and creating new features or concepts for the game. However, I'm going to use the term concepts very lightly, as in Star Citizen community we're very accustomed to seeing imagery every time we hear that word. Something visual to gorp at and obsess over. This won't always strictly be the case for Feature Creep, but I'll be sure to add B-roll, illustrations or even case studies where appropriate. The concepts I'll cover are ones which will or could be part of Star Citizen. As a result, this means the show will cover anything and everything Star Citizen, ranging from entire gameplay loops, player usables, mission types, spaceships, just basically anything that could be bullet pointed on a list as a feature. You'll often find items which have been confirmed and not released, talked about or just alluded to by CRG, and with that, here's today's topic. Today we're going to talk about another set of player tools, the enablers of all player-based gameplay. In specific, today we're talking about rope. Yup, plain old rope. And I know what you're thinking. What idiot's going to talk about rope for an insert length of video amount of time and expect me to stay? But I promise, you might as well like and subscribe now, because boy have I got an emotional rollercoaster ride for you. So you sat there thinking still, okay, the game's set 930 years in the future from now. Why in the name of hell would I still be using a rope? It would only be used to hang yourself in game after you found out that salvage is delayed again, surely. Well, I have a better question for you. Why wouldn't we? Rope's one of humankind's most versatile and oldest tools. Even though it's only really used to bind two or more objects together, it, as a tool, is timeless, and its resourcefulness and simplicity far outweigh reasons not to use it. Alongside the ending remarks, this obvious fact about its resourcefulness is the reason I'm choosing to cover rope in this video, or more specifically, this use case of it. Introducing the Anvil Carrack trailer. For the uninitiated, the Carrack's an exploration vessel, the go anywhere, do anything exploration spaceship you'd seen in many a sci-fi show. But more to the point, the main character of the short trailer can be seen navigating a number of environments, freely exploring the planets and moons supposedly thanks to the versatility of their ship. And in one case, thanks to rope. Yep. The supposed protagonist can be seen a couple of times using a winch-like rope pulley system to delve into the depths of caves below. So it's hinted at officially, but not actually confirmed as a feature. Every time they talk about different entrances for caves, they specifically mention spaceships. The idea here of course being that you get in your spaceship and slowly VTOL down into the cave itself. Kind of like the huge quarry area you can find on Levski Delamar, which you can go in game and visit right now. Ooh. Okay, never mind. The main use case for this is obviously just caves. But when they mention other methods of being able to enter the said caves, they kind of casually shy away and just remain optimistic about there being new ones in the future. Regardless, it's still an idea which for some reason greatly excites me, and it's the feature creep we'll explore today. What if this existed? How would it work? What's stopping it from being in-game? Would I really want a tool for just one job seemingly? Well, I have multiple ideas for it, but you'll hear about that later. Introducing the rope winch pulley system tool. Yeah, I don't really come up with the names of these, just the ideas. But here's what we're working with for today. So imagine this winch tool. Use case wise, it's pretty simple. It's carried on your back much like any of your weapons, but registered as a utility item like the Greycat multi-tool. If you're interested in lore, yeah, it's fine for Greycat to make this too. In terms of it, you equipped it and it's much like putting a cargo box down in place in an area which is acceptable. From there, your inner fort system has several options when facing it. Some are situational, but at first you'd at least have attach, which we'll get to later, deploy, and finally stow. Now it's pretty obvious what the last option, stow, does. It just simply puts it back on your back. So for now, let's explore that second option. Deploy would have the player animate and take the rope by hand. A small length of cord will be unreeled upon this, and the further you walk away, the more cord gets unreeled. Simple stuff. Of course, having it in hand would then prompt a number of additional inner thought scenarios, such as throw, drop, maybe you could place it on the floor, etc, etc. Of course, with this option there are a number of caveats gameplay wise, or as we know them, blockers, for this to be implemented and feel right, especially with CRG's high standards. Like, what happens when you reel out all the available cord? Does the force reaction system tug and jolt the player back in the direction of the source of the rope? Plus then there's stuff you probably haven't even thought of, such as have another person run into the unwinded rope between the winch and the player. I mean, we're all sat here hoping it looks that awesome, right? Right? All these blockers are things we'll cover later in the video, where we'll discuss the likelihood and reasons why this seemingly simple real life thing may not be able to be replicated inside of a game like Star Citizen. But for now, we can dream. The top option you notice I mentioned said attach, which leads me to a nice segue for the second tool of today. Introducing the Greycat multi-tool repel attachment. Design wise, this is literally intended to be used in conjunction with any type of rope or the rope tool itself. I thought ahead here and made sure you can use them in conjunction and also be physicalized and carried at the same time. So I mentioned before that the rope winch is carried as a weapon in a weapon slot on your back, but used like a utility item, whereas obviously the Greycat repel tool just sits on your hip in the utility slot. So back to the rope winch tool, the attach function. It's present only specifically if you have a Greycat repel tool in your hand. Basically you're attaching the Greycat tool to the rope at any point on the rope. There could also be a secondary scenario for the attach function to be present. This is when you have it deployed in hand. The rope could interact with anything that supports the function. For example, if you wish to hook it to another player's Greycat repel tool, you could do so for them. If you sit and think about this, it has some very interesting use cases. The nifty thing about this tool is ideally it's linked, meaning that when you need to retract all of the cord, you can do it from the multi-tool itself. And then on the other hand, just like one of those cool vacuum retraction buttons, you can reel in the cord from the device itself at the top. Now we've discussed the idea, let's talk about getting it into the game, or more accurately, the blockers of this said tool. For such a seemingly simple object, there are a ton of things which can easily stop this from being inside any given video game. So we're quickly going to look at the couple case studies of how ropes tend to work in other video games. Because getting rope and rope-like things to work in a video game, even ones which heavily feature them, is a pain. Never mind massively multiplayer open world science fiction space simulations. The troubles of getting rope working inside a video game are largely physics based. Traditionally, rope is implemented in one of two ways. The first and most classical is to make a long object and place a number of invisible bones and joints along it. Depending on how many joints there are, define the ability to maneuver the rope to how you wish. The problem with this is, if not fine enough, the rope begins to act more like, well, a chain. Which makes a lot of sense because that's how chains are made, they're just a number of straight objects joined together at either end. So when done incorrectly, this becomes pretty clear that's what's happening. Especially if the cloth material or the texture the rope is made out of stretches and pulls at the joints unrealistically, leading to different colour blotches along the rope. So while it's a very popular implementation, the obvious downsides are, if using a rope or cable, it can't fold back on itself at any one point unless it's a joint, which again leads to a feeling that it's unrealistic or janky. This can of course be fixed by adding finer bone joints, but then each section of the rope needs to have accurate collision boxes and a number of other nuances, which in short add up to a whole load of computing in order for just something as simple as rope to be working. Especially when you consider that typically it's used to just swing across a ravine or something in a video game in what's like a 3-second interaction. It's a lot of work just to put up for just that. The second method, which is quite common in the industry as well, which leads to a more believable effect but less interactivity typically, is to have just a physics-based engine handle and animate small thin strips of cloth. Effectively, they're just 2 points on a line and the middle bit is wavy. This these days is relatively inexpensive, or getting more so, dependent on the scale of course. You've probably seen this effect as a background prop, say like a torn top floating around in the wind, or anything that hangs from a ceiling like chandeliers or low hanging light bulbs, or even those weird beady door curtains that people have because... The problem here is they're not really appropriate for gameplay interactions, or at least not certain complex ones. They have basic collisions, so they act how you expect when you get close to them, but imagine if a singular strand had to calculate colliding into themselves constantly, well... However, out of the two options, this one is the one which I would make a bet for as being more plausible application inside of Star Citizen, given some work. Just take note of that cloth simulation I mentioned briefly, but coming back to that. So onto the blockers and the people that will need to help make this tool. It's already clear that if CRG want to do this at the fidelity they have for the rest of the game, which is likely, then this requires a ton of work. The animation, tools, UI, gameplay, engine, art, actor feature and tech teams are just some of the teams I can list off the top of my head who would need to get involved or touch this tool at some point. Even the difficulty of solving how a player scales a wall in this game while using rope would be quite baffling, and this is thanks to some simple decisions Star Citizen made a while ago, because if you didn't know, the first and third person animations in this game are exactly the same. What you're doing in person is what other people see, and what you will see if you zoomed out to third person. Which means, say, where your legs are placed, what your arms are doing, whether you can actually see what you're doing, are all very important factors when including a tool like this in Star Citizen. If we were talking about using the rope tool to scale walls and buildings, should they choose the fidelity of an abseiling method like Rainbow Six Siege, not only do they have animations for the tool to get right, they'd also have to blend and adapt to the angle and depth of that said surface as the player traverses it, and then make sure that looks right in both camera perspectives, which I presume is some very heavy motion capture and keyframing work. But also have it in a state where animations make it obvious what you're doing and where you are from either perspective. Yikes. And if they don't, but you're freely allowed to zoom up and down the rope using the repel tool and it just kind of zooms you up and down, they'll still have problems. For example, what happens at the top? Does it transition to an orderly in-game climb animation? But how does it know to do that? Can it just detect the edge of any given surface? It's all a bit baffling when you consider all the use cases from deploying, climbing, and hell, we haven't even talked about swinging on the rope. There are some shortcuts they could take to getting this tool working though. Starting with its initial implementation. Let's just say this wasn't a tool the player could freely place down wherever they are. It was already placed in the environment by an artist or a level designer, some nice guy who happened to think if you found a sinkhole cave without your spaceship, you should still be able to get down there and have a look around. Introducing Case Study 1. This is Modern Warfare's Warzone, a fairly popular and sizable battle royale. On certain places in the map you can traverse the environment vertically by using, you guessed it, rope. The implementation is simple and definitely not up to CIG's lofty standards in fidelity, but it works anytime and every time, which is more than I can say for some of CIG's methods of linear transportation from A to B. Of course, all this is doing in the game is offering you two interaction points. Activating one takes your player's position and moves it and animates it to the other one. The rope isn't animated realistically, it has the collision of a titanium pole. It exists as a static object inside the game, but thanks to sound design, the way it feels and the simplicity of use, it's a great feature and works very well. And as a basis for the rope tool, or the rope winch tool, it's a really good starting point, and I can't see why CIG couldn't implement something like this into the game. As a basis, from here, CIG could start working on the level of fidelity they so crave. Of course, as lofty as the goals I've set for such a seemingly simple tool, I wouldn't have made this entire episode about the subject if it were impossible for CIG to add it in. But let's not get sidetracked here. CIG has a bar to raise, or at least match at this point. Introducing case study number 2, which of course is The Last of Us Part 2. Now, while some people were idiotically bickering about how large a female's arms are allowed to be, when this game launched it was heavily revered for more than just its story and graphics. A few absolute nerds such as myself noticed one particularly insane detail, and I'm not talking about PS3 Easter eggs. Of course, we're back to rope. The rope in this game was world class, and to this day it's a baffling dedication to something which must be get featured in the game around 7 times tops. The rope realistically bends, sways, bunches, loops and collides with itself and other objects. On top of this, it can be interacted with at any given point. it has a determined length and weight depending on whether it's actually cable or rope, and the character using it has animations for all instances. Whether it's reading it in as they get closer to the source, picking it up from any point, throwing, swinging, getting to the end of the rope's length and being yanked back, the weight, reaction and realism present within its interaction is baffling. And again, you must only see this in the entire game like 7 times, and some of those are optional. Thankfully, some other nerds took note of this and started asking about. And for the bad news, as confirmed by the technical animator at Naughty Dog, who just plain is static to see people notice their work, getting rope working in this state took a number of the Naughty Dog team 3 entire months to get right. 3 months. That's a lot of time for something so simple, and at that point arguably underused. But hey, at least they have the tech for the future, right? And since CIG's gameplay content and player tools effectively outputs at the same speed of a Star Citizen barman serving you a beer, we can expect this to be seen in 2.5 years if they start tomorrow, maybe? Just imagine the new possibilities if they got this right. Pulling up in an Anvil Valkyrie and not having to land to deploy the troops to the surface, instead just deploy the ropes. Think about not having to replan an entire journey when your Greycat rock flips over. You just attach the rope to the pulley and pull it back onto its wheels. Now for that particular example, you're probably already a bit salty that the handheld tractor beam can't do that for you, but I suppose weight wise, at least it makes sense. How about airlifting some cargo about, maybe of the volatile nature, and just, you know, casually dropping it or using it as a wrecking ball? Who knows? Abseiling competitions on the Microtech buildings, and of course, just getting yourself out of that cave you got stuck in that's now glitched but nobody's realised until now. Providing the community with a tool which is admittedly surprisingly complex to implement, but only needs a multitude of scenarios for them to experiment with. Opening the floodgates for some truly emergent gameplay. I wouldn't have made this video already too long a video if I didn't believe it were capable, or already considering it and accidentally working on it, would I? Introducing case study number 3, CIG themselves. So remember this? Yep, that's the 2949 CitizenCon event. Somewhere in this demo they demonstrated this, cloth physics. Now, if you remember correctly, I told you to hold on to that thought earlier. In particular, you should remember that they showed this snazzy lab coat and a tarp covering an Ursa rover out in the wild. The research and development done on the cloth physics allowed them to sway in the storm realistically, collide with itself and other objects, stay a predetermined size but stretch and bend where appropriate force was added or taken away, bunch, fold, and do basically everything you'd expect from cloth, and on top of this, also be interactive with at seemingly any point on their surface, but I'm not 100% sure on that bit. Much like, well, rope would need to. On top of this, while the focus was motion capture, did anybody notice this during an Inside Star Citizen?
Was that someone else I heard moaning about having to recall all the diags last shift?
Yeah, okay. I haven't been the best either, but complaining...
Let's see it again.
All the diags last shift?
Yeah, okay.
Yep, that refueling pipe moved pretty damn realistically, but not in the way where it seemed like a predetermined, scripted and animated event. It jiggled, it bended, and flowed much more like you'd expect in real life. Okay. Ignore the guy in the background. It's kinda safe to say that clearly either that second pipe wasn't physicalized in this scene or just set up correctly. But look at that initial pipe. Just look closely. And you notice the same thing that this represented for me. Hope. And that's it for today's episode of Feature Creep. We're a fairly new channel, so if you enjoyed what you saw today, please be sure to drop a like down below, comment with your thoughts, negative and positive, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more in the future, keep on doppying, and we'll see you in the next one.